and welcome to Assembly Audible. I'm your host, multimedia editor Jennifer Pierce. We're so happy you're listening in. Today we are recording from the Assembly Show in Rosemont, Illinois at the Donald E. Stephens Convention Center. I am joined by Sean Major, who is a sales engineer with ATI Technologies. Sean, thank you so much for making time to record a podcast.
This seems vaguely familiar to me.
Exactly. So the backstory is I was giving a guided tour or hosting a guided tour, leading a guided tour last year, and we met and sort of organically started talking about, and you were enthusiastically telling me about some of the top technologies you observed at the show last year. And I said, let's connect after the show and have a conversation and record it. And it actually ended up being a popular podcast. We called it the top 5 technologies from the Assembly Show 2023.
Yes, ma'am.
So when I saw you today, I said, gotta have you back on the show and get your take.
Let's do it.
Yes, and so you're here to give us your take on the Assembly Show 2024 and some of the interesting technologies or trends that you've been observing. So where should we start?
Well, let's start with this. I got in the industry over 8 years ago, and when I first came to the show, it was almost predominantly fastening. You had quite a few different torque companies, and over the years it's kind of transitioned, it kind of went away to other things, and this year it seems to have a huge resurgence of fastening again.
Why do you think that is?
Well, there's a few different things I'm thinking. One, a lot of the technology within fastening is being more readily able to be poke-yoked. You're finding that they've got a lot of different brands out there that are coming out with newer technologies. There's one down over there, it's MC, and we'll get into that later on. But they've all been coming out with new ways of doing things, and it's like, we've got to share this. And with so many different groups focused on trying to make sure that their processes are recordable and repeatable,
yes,
having these new technologies are going to change the game in many different ways for different vendors and customers themselves.
Interesting.
So, where would you like to start on that?
Well, so air proofing, fastening.
Yes.
That's what we're talking about here. Actually, let's retrace some steps and talk about data collection and using data collection to air-proof things, and also preventative maintenance, because that factors in as well, right?
Absolutely it does. So years ago, the big buzzword was always Industry 4.0.
And automation.
Yep, automation's
I'm curious how that all factors in too, but we can make our way there.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing is with Industry 4.0 is it was all about gathering data, then using the data in order to improve your processes.
Right.
Okay? That way you had less errors, you had less quality issues, and the more airproofing that you could do, the more you guarantee you give a burst certificate for that item and said, I have proof that this has gone through every single step and every torque is right and everything. Here's the burst certificate of a quality product.
Right.
Back then, a lot of your main tools were 15, 17, 20 grand plus. And so a couple companies went, well, there's a gap in the market. Coleco was one of them, Ingersoll Rand was another one, and they started creating tools that were less costly but still got you the data. Now, people are going, okay, we've got the data, but we have other issues, and we need to be able to airproof those other issues. So one of the technologies I saw, Estic, I have said Estic is one of my favorite brands for years and years and years. It's what I cut my teeth on, so I have a certain loyalty there anyways. But they actually have I think it's called In-Bolt, where they are using a robot, and on a moving line, it's able to find the bolt that it needs to do, fasten it down, and still prove that it did it. That's not something that I've seen before.
Okay.
So it's using a vision system that can be tied to robotics that still uses a hand torque tool that if something goes down with a robot, they are still able to actually turn around and do the process manually and still have some sort of level of pokey.
Right. So shout out Estic. You made the list.
Estic made the list.
Right. I mean, are we starting at 5? Are we aiming for 5? We didn't even really discuss that in this before we started recording. We just said we're going to have a conversation about it.
Let's just keep the conversation.
All right.
So I already mentioned another one. So MC. I had never heard of them before. They have, now I will say their interface isn't the sexiest, so to speak, but they actually found out, so all the main manufacturers are trying to prevent cross-threading. Cross-threading can create problems in your build process, it can create quality issues, it's a very common thing. They found out that if you run a bolt in reverse, it actually sends off a certain number of hertz of sound, and when it slides into the proper position, it always makes a specific sound. They've honed in on that, so the way their tool works is it'll run in reverse until it detects that specific hertz, then it puts the tool in forward and actually lets you do the rundown. The second part of that is they actually have a thing where you can program in the length of the actual stud or bolt itself, so it can tell if you missed a washer in your build process.
I love this.
So it can guarantee that the operator did the steps that they had to do for that secure. Again, that's something that currently I've never seen it.
Right.
And this is a brand new company that I've never seen at the show.
Yeah. I had someone on the podcast earlier, and he was talking about similar trends in leak testing.
Yep. You have a lot of leak testing here. I've talked to 3 different companies. Now, there's one huge deficiency in the leak testing market that I've seen. So I deal a lot with Caterpillar. And in Caterpillar, they use a company called Pinpoint. And while they're starting to create more and more leak testers that will actually report to a system, like Pico can read most of those, they can gather the information, but nobody seems to be able to talk to Pinpoint. The closest one, and I forgot the name of them, they're right down over there. The guy's head is in the way, but
you missed your opportunity to make the list, whoever
right?
You are. We'll figure it out.
I will shoot you a message with who that is. But they are the closest ones to being able to talk to like Pinpoint. But again, that's a step of the process that a lot of places had not been able to poke you on. So now that you've got these leak testers that can now talk to the system, say, okay, we've guaranteed that this product is leak proof. They also have a lot more fluid handling where it's saying, I can prove that I put Loctite on this bolt. So going with that whole theme of making sure that the operators are doing the full process and creating that birth certificate, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's going on.
Yeah. Well, and that can also probably be a source of protection from litigation or lawsuits, right? If you have that, you're able to trace that the process was done correctly or dummy-proofed,
Yep.
as you said earlier.
Poke-yoke is how they prefer to call it nowadays.
Okay. All right, cool.
But to answer your question, yes, it can help you from litigation, but also helps with warranty issues. So the further product goes down the line and they catch an error, the more it's going to cost to repair that error.
That makes sense.
So if you're proving step by step that there's no error, then you don't have the problems on rework at the end.
Well, and this is a great example because, I don't hear as many people talking about this now, and this is probably a good thing, but a few years ago, everyone was like, well, what is everybody doing with the data we're collecting? And this sounds like proof that people are applying it in an impactful manner, which is nice.
So something I'm surprised that I haven't seen more of. Right now, you're correct. Everyone's starting to gather that data. Some places are using them, some places are just storing it. But with the advent of all the AI that's been coming out, you got a couple places that are actually using AI. I know Demeter has a version. I think Pico's kind of using some AI. They should be able to look at that data set and be able to predict patterns and be able to actually help make suggestions like, okay, we've noticed that on this particular application, you're consistently at 55 Newton meters with 120 degrees of rotation. If we see more or less than that, we're going to say there's something wrong. And that'll actually help them to make sure that the parts are good when they're doing the build process. So it's one of those things that that's a new area, and some places are kind of dabbling in it. I'm going to say the next year or two, you're going to see a lot more companies kind of play into that. We've got all this data, and instead of Industry 4.0, I think they call it Industry 5.0 at that point. But how are we actually moving forward with what we just gathered?
I love this. So now we're doing some trend forecasting here at the show.
Mark
on
me if I'm wrong.
Assembly Audible. Well, I love trend forecasting. Interesting. Okay, well, thank you for sharing those insights.
Yeah, there were a couple other things I wanted to kind of make sure I mentioned.
Oh, absolutely. We've got time.
Okay, perfect.
We've only covered, what, three or
four.
on our list? Yeah.
So, Ingersoll Rand actually came out with something. Now, they do a lot of they do a broad range of stuff, but they came out with a low torque tool. In the low torque tool, they actually put a gyro in it so that they can tell if the person's vertical or if they're off.
Oh.
If
the
it's too
angle
far
matters.
off, well, angle and torque tightening is referring to the degrees of a circle of basically part of the torque curve, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they're actually talking about the actual angle of the tool and making sure that you're properly vertical. If you're off, you can cause slippage, you can cause cross threads. There's a lot of other things that can go wrong. This won't let the tool run unless it's in the proper position. So for things like circuit boards where you're talking inch pounds, and if you over torque it, you can destroy the entire circuit board, this guarantees that they at least are in the right angle so that it's not going to destroy anything.
Interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
so shout out Ingersoll. That's hard for me to say this company's name.
IR.
Ingersoll Rand. I got it out. Shout out IR. You've been mentioned as a top technology on Assembly Audible.
Now, I did mention DeSuter's Demeter. They're one of the ones that are using AI to predictively look at what's going on and how to improve processes. They haven't really, well, I'm not sure if they've upgraded it much from last year. It's something that they're still dabbling in. I'm sure it's improved significantly, but they're probably the front runner in that. The other one I mentioned was Pico. Now, Pico I mentioned last year because the first year that I met them, they were kind of basic. And then last year, they had revamped their entire system. They're talking to more tools, they're talking to more different products so that they're easier to integrate. There's a competitive product out there, I won't mention the name specifically, but their implementation can take 2, 3, 4 weeks, even longer,
Right.
to do a basic series of 5 or 10 stations. Pico, you can do it in probably 2 to 3 days. And that's even if you have a very complex build. Like, a lot of companies sit there and like, well, that doesn't make sense for us to do something like that because we've got 1,000 different types of this product that we build. Yeah, Pico makes it super easy for you to go, okay, keep most of this, remove that, and change that. They've done very well with that, but the thing that blows my mind with them is they're now doing a free license forever.
An open source type of a platform, right?
So if you want to use their product, if you want to play around with it, you want to start building your processes, and you're not a major company like Caterpillar or Ford, and you want to start those basic steps, it's free to use up until a certain point. Like, and by the way, that certain point isn't based on, well, you've had it a week. It's based on, oh, you need to grow it in this manner. Okay, we probably have to do a servo or something like that. Like,
Right.
They are, in old school sales, you always want to get the product in the customer's hands so they can play with it. They're making it easier for the customers to play with, and especially the mom and pop shops, like I said, that are growing,
Yeah.
they get to play with it, they get to build their process.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, I remembered, so I was fortunate to interview Ryan and Brian back a few years ago when Pico started. And now that you're talking about this open source platform, is it a software platform, if you will?
Yeah.
It doesn't surprise me because part of Ryan's mission was to not reinvent the wheel and get information into the hands of small to mid-sized manufacturers.
Yep.
So the open source aspect doesn't really surprise me all that much when I think back to what they talked about, what his mission or his the driving force was behind creating Pico. So it makes
Yep.
some sense to me.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. And to watch them transition, because they used to talk about it, now we're seeing it in live action. And for a tool salesman like me, great, we had the talking point of Industry 4.0 and we want to gather data. And what do we do with that data?
Right.
Now you've got somebody who's going, we're going to help you poke-yoke your thing, even though you're a mom and pop shop, and there's not a $10,000, $25,000, $100,000 barrier to entry. So now it's going to allow those people to be competitive, but as a tool salesman, they're going to need to come to us to be able to get the proper tools to be able to set up those processes over time. So they're actually helping as a proper partner, a channel partner for the tool sales guys on the ground floor.
Before we started recording, you were talking about the assembly show, because you've been here for years. So you were talking about the assembly show seems to have gone back to its original roots.
Yes.
Can you explain what you meant by that?
Well, when I came on board, now mind you, I came on board, I went from being a waiter at a place called Jonah's
I love your
Seafood
story,
House.
by the way. And then you contacted somebody every day for like 3
Oh
years.
yeah, it was a year.
I'm just kidding.
And I pestered him every 3 weeks for a year, and finally he's like, let's get the guy a shot, you know?
Well, because you're passionate about your work, that comes through. I'm sure they saw that in you when you first met them.
Oh, very much so. And so when I first came in, I walked this floor not having clue one what I was really doing, what I was looking at, what I was looking for. But there's a lot of fastening. And then over the years, I mean, obviously we've gone through COVID, but there's a lot more automation that kind of came around. But this year, there's still a lot of automation here. There's still a lot of cool technology that's tied to automation. But this year, there seems to be a resurgence. There's 7 different fastening companies that I've never even heard of. And I was just like, wow. Because people are coming to the market with more and more stuff that, like the MC place that I mentioned, who they're keeping it so that you can actually poke yoke the fact that they forgot a washer. You know, people are finding other ways to be able to do that through our technology. And again, it's not breaking the bank. And speaking of which, one of the technologies I saw that blew my mind is actually coming from Crane Electronics.
Shout out Crane Electronics.
Yep. I was in their booth earlier on. They came out with a transducer, so they do residual torque testing to make sure that the torque that's in the joint after you do your rundowns has enough clamp load to keep everything together, right? Well, in this industry, transducerized nut runners are expensive. Impact tools are cheap. Impact tools, you tend not to have to worry about torque reaction. The problem is impact tools aren't very accurate traditionally. Like, depending on who you talk to, they'll say plus or minus 25% or plus or minus 10%. They came up with a software where what they're doing is you keep doing rundowns and it's checking what hertz is the right hertz for that tool and on that specific joint. When it gets a match, then you do your testing. They're actually finding that these impact tools can be accurate plus or minus 5%, which puts them in a realm where they can almost be used on safety critical joints. To give you an idea, Ingersoll Rand came out with an impact tool a couple years ago. Panasonic has a great impact tool that they've had forever, but most people were like, they're only accurate 15%. If I can prove that it's accurate 5% and I can put it on a safety critical joint, that's a $1,200 tool versus a $17,000 tool, which could be a complete game changer in the industry. Now, I don't know what the ramifications are on the legalities on the backside, but from a perspective of somebody who sells these things, to me, that's a huge game changer. Am I making sense?
Yeah. Yes. No, I'm staying with you here. They increased the percentage.
They decreased
the percentage.
They're able to prove that those tools that were considered wildly inaccurate
25%?
can actually be pretty darn accurate.
Okay.
And now those tools have to be set up. They are very joint specific. So you can't just use it on this one and then go over here. But if you have it set up for that joint and you're consistently doing that joint, it can do that joint plus or minus 5, which is what most places have their accuracy for safety critical joints.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
You heard it here from Sean Major, not from me, because I am no industry expert, but I'm sure our listeners are really going to appreciate that information. So
Sure.
Thank you so much. I tried to keep up. You lost me a little bit at the end. I'll confess it on live. But yeah, so is there anything else that you saw that you want to close with today?
So yeah, when I
ATI
say
Technologies is lucky to have you, by the way.
cheers. I think they're really happy
You need
to
a
have me.
podcast.
Huh?
You need your own podcast.
I contemplated it once.
Okay.
But no, so one of the other trends that I've noticed, so when I first got in, all I knew was torque tools, torque testing, stuff like that. Through my time with my former company, I learned more about material handling. I learned a lot about material handling and had to drink out of a fire hose, to be honest about it. It was not my forte originally. Now I'm pretty strong with it. There's quite a bit of material handling, but not as much as when I first came. So while we've seen a resurgence of tooling, I haven't seen a lot of torque handling or material handling type stuff here. There is still some, but it's not as prevalent as it was even 3 or 4 years ago. You had Indiva who used to display here. You had GCI who was here at one point in time. There's multiple different manipulator arm companies that used to come, and I haven't seen hardly any. So while we've seen more leak testing and more fluid handling and way more actual torque tools, we're seeing less of the material handling side of things.
All right.
So it's something that I'm kind of interested in seeing if it's going to grow back, because you have to get the materials to the line at some point, and you have to use it to install things. So we'll see.
All right. Well, Sean, thank you so much.
Cheers.
Did we cover everything that caught your eye?
So far, absolutely, and thank you for having me again.
Absolutely. I love talking to you. You inspire me, and you have so much knowledge to share, so I really appreciate your time.
Cheers.
Cheers. All
Have a
right.
great afternoon.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Assembly Audible. We invite you to check out all of our content, webinars, and events on assemblymag.com. Also, please follow us on social media to keep up with the latest insights on the people, procedures, and technologies for assembling parts into finished products. I'm Jennifer Pierce with Sean Major, signing off for today. Thanks for listening.